sometimes is really bad. So I might ask you to repeat.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Cool. It looks like we are live. Um, Great. Before we get into a conversation, I thought we'll take a couple of minutes to hear from you, Marion, in terms of your experience in the HR field, how you got into HR, where you come from, your decision to move to China and kind of start a consultancy with HR. Super keen to hear that story.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, Rose, for having me for this discussion. I'm really excited about discussing these topics with you as well and hearing from you. Um, so yeah, the idea of first of all, the idea of coming to China, that was a bit weird, and that's something I've had for a very long time. So I grew up in Tahiti, and in Tahiti there is a person of the population that originally comes from China. So I'm not sure if it's from Guangdong, the south of China, or other parts of China, but you have a very big minority of Chinese people in Tahiti. So my best friend when I was small and young was Chinese, actually, French Chinese. And so when I went to her house, I would see those scripts on those characters on the wall. She was living with her grandfather. We call it ye ye. She was speaking a language that I couldn't understand. That was not French, and so I got fascinated, I guess. And then from then on, I think I had in my head this fixed idea and objective: I need to go to China. So for me, it's never been the US, it's never been Dubai, or it's really been like China, not even Beijing or Hong Kong or no, China, Shanghai. And then I don't know why exactly. So that's my explanation around China. You know, most things come from the childhood, so that's one of them for me.
100%. You know, I also have quite an interest for kind of the East Asian culture, and I have not had any exposure in my childhood to it, but it's just so interesting how sometimes
Yeah.
something resonates with you and you're kind of really drawn to it. But I completely get that from your childhood, you were kind of, interested, and there was some sort of like something to probably explore or see. But then
Right.
when it comes to HR, did you study in France, Tahiti, and then that decision to kind of start an HR consultancy in China? How was that?
So that's, yeah, I don't come from the HR background per se. So I haven't done any studies around HR. I've done business studies. So, of course, there were courses around the legal part of hiring, there were courses around psychology and people. But per se, a real specialty in HR, that's not. And even in the beginning, I was also thinking it's so boring, HR. It's such a boring job, right? When I was at school, I was like, never ever will I be in HR. And the only internship I did was in headhunting, and I loved it. But that was it. I was more interested in going, getting clients, and understanding their culture, and seeing like different companies have different ways of doing things, and hiring, and onboarding people, and treating people. And I was really interested in understanding that more than going and finding the right candidate for the client. So I guess it went step by step. I come from a sales background, and I got really fascinated with, in sales, how you analyze everything and you take all the data and you really look at every angle and you really overanalyze almost your customer behaviors. And so from the first touch point until the moment the client buys, and even afterwards, you have all the different touch points and the client journey. And I felt it's funny that we're doing so much work with our clients and so little with our employees, because I was an employee, and I would clearly see that there was no work done around my journey, my experience as an employee. And so I got more and more curious. So I guess I got into HR because I was into sales and into people, into psychology, understanding what motivates people, what rebuts them, and this is what got me into that field.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I mean, when you're in HR, you're very much the kind of marketing and sales and customer service department internally, right? So there's a lot of correlations that one can do, and I guess the more exposure that you actually have to those fields, the better as an HR person that you're, or department you're going to be able to come up with, right?
Right. That's
So
it.
yeah.
How did you get into HR? I don't know that story.
it was very much studying psychology back home. So also drawn to people behavior, and then I specialized in HR. And then I was an air hostess, which gave me a massive experience on customer service, which
Right,
was
for sure.
definitely brought back to HR in the consultancy. So yeah, when I came to South Africa, I was like, okay, I'm gonna start it with a company with HR and then branch on my own to start a consultancy. Yeah.
Okay, so you're all the background that I don't have, you have it. That's great. I
From
love it.
studying. Yes,
Yeah.
and building the consultancy basics in terms of the offering definitely went back to school times and how they teach you to do things,
Right.
and then with HR, and I guess with all disciplines, you really have to be on top of the research, what's latest. There's trends and there's also circumstances, so you have to always kind of keep up and see what's kind of best practice.
Right.
Now, what I want to do with you, Marion, is that I have this kind of idea of how employment looks like in China. So I
Yeah.
want to describe to you that picture of how I think employment works in China, and then you can correct me,
Okay.
say, okay, this is kind of how it goes. But I think it's so interesting because it's obviously a foreign land,
Yeah.
and you have this preconceptions of how things work. So I thought it was an interesting exercise before we go into talent retention. So I like watching Korean soap operas.
Okay.
No shame in that, full disclosure. And there's a lot of these soap operas that show you the kind of dynamics of the workplace. And I guess Korea, China will resonate a little bit. So that's kind of what I'm basing this on. But it's mainly the main, like the workforce mostly works for corporates. So it's these companies with like a really big staff complement, and that there is this very stringent process for recruitment where it's like almost like a panel, and people are in front of you, and then they get there's a lot of questions that are happening, and that's how they decide who's going to take on the role. And once someone takes on a role, it's not a permanent thing. They go into kind of a fixed intern type of thing where for a fixed period, and almost when they become permanent, it's like a massive celebration, like, okay, now they're done for life, now they have a kind of a permanent employment. And then what I also see is that it's very highly kind of regulated, the fact that you start with a role name, and then you go into you get promoted, which has to do with how many years in the role that you have, and obviously who's kind of like who's ready for it from a kind of funnel point of view, like, okay, you've been with a company this long, you do this role well, this is the next thing for you. And all the way to being kind of a manager, and it seems like being a manager is like a big thing, like there's a lot of this respect for hierarchy, and a very defined hierarchy that you almost can't contest, almost like lateral moves don't seem like a thing. It's like, you kind of know your trajectory with a company. And yeah, that's kind of my idea of how employment in China works. So debunk it for me.
Debunk it. I'm not sure. So when I'm hearing you, I'm hearing different things, and I try and compare it to the reality that I see here. So I'll speak because of course we work with China, we work also with Asia, so Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all the Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia countries. So all these countries have different aspects and cultures as well in terms of work and approach to work that are different. What's really interesting is even in China, it's such a big country. You would have different cultures within China. Of course, you have like a general law that everyone follows, but you might see different ways of doing things or approaching work from Chengdu to Shanghai. Chengdu, people would tell you that it's a lot more laid back and people take work a lot less seriously. Whereas in Shanghai, people are very much about making money and driven by success and next steps and accomplishment. And it's really a different mentality. So even within China, you can find like lots of different cultures. So I guess, the closer I could get to with what you're telling me is probably the Shanghai kind of like vibe, which is very much driven by work, accomplishment, position, title, salary, growth, and things like that. And even in Shanghai, it's not everyone like this. It's not all the industries or all the companies that have this mentality. If you're employed by the government or if you're employed by a private company like Alibaba or a foreign company, then you will have lots of very different cultures from one country, from one company to another. What I'm hearing is this respect for hierarchy, which I think and I believe is very strong amongst all countries. So if you go to Japan, it's extremely strong. Korea, it's very strong. China as well. So the boss is the boss, the king, the cannot be wrong, and it has to be respected. And there is a lot you can see. It's very very present in the gesture, in the way people speak to one another, what can be said, what cannot be said to the boss, and it's really interesting. No matter what the boss does, then there is this respect that is there no matter what. And so that's super interesting, because that's something you need to take into account when you're entering a company and helping with the culture of the company. Then you have to take into account that you have to work with the boss for sure, because that will come from here even more so. And yeah, in terms of regulation, it's true that regarding China specifically, so when I'm thinking two things. There is local contracts that you could think of, and you have expat contracts. So these, in terms of law, are also slightly different. And the law in China is really interesting, because we've seen how it's evolved very rapidly over the past decade, because the government is actually evolving very very fast, and so is the law here. And so things are changing all the time. It's extremely fast, and we need to be up to date with the latest changes. So it's a country that moves very very fast in every sense of the way, even in terms of HR, which is extremely interesting. It keeps you on your toes basically. So yeah, there is a chunk that is evolving around work for someone's life. Work is still very very important. I do see something that's happening. The whole great resignation that you would see in the West hasn't happened quite here, not so much, but there is this sentiment that is coming up where people are asking a lot more why. Specifically when people are highly educated, specifically when people have been educated abroad in the US, in the UK, in Australia, and come back and work in China, there's this question of, why do I work for this company? Why do I do this work? Why does it matter to me? And so I have seen people who have been put in certain position by their parents or society, or I don't know what, and haven't really asked that question until they're 28, 35, 40, and have that crisis moment where they're thinking, my life is over because I chose the wrong industry or the wrong position, the wrong job. And there is, though, I could see that there is a lot more flexibility around changing industry and jobs here than there is in the West, at least in Europe. So that's what's interesting, is that question that people raise, they can actually do something about it. And there's a lot of coaching that is possible around, hey, you know what, if that's not what really like gets you going, let's explore other options, because you can actually move and you can change. And it's still not extremely flexible in terms of HR accepting people with super weird background to an industry that usually is very conservative, maybe, or very much used to certain profiles. But I would say a lot more than probably in the West. So that's something that's interesting. You have more freedom and flexibility around that.
Yeah, that is indeed very interesting and very different to what I had in mind. Now, on that point where people are more like inclined to question these days, does that show up as a kind of rebelling against, the boss, or what we were speaking about, that the structure, or is it more like a kind of personal journey, and then they just end up living and doing their own thing? And this obviously ties up with talent retention, because you probably do maybe exit surveys. Do people speak up when they leave, or are you able to run certain interventions where people open up to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll tell you from my perspective what I feel, what I see when I speak. So when I have conversations all day, I can have conversations with someone from the top management and to student, someone who's coming out from school and just graduating. So, for instance, tomorrow I'm going to a mentor walk. There's lots of Chinese, often ladies, that are coming and actually sharing with other ladies around their career, how to manage, how to deal with that. So I hear also from them how they perceive work, what they see is coming up, and I see trends because they're so young. So you can already predict, oh, this is going to bring this and that kind of trends in like 5, 6, 10 years probably. I believe it comes more from the questioning around oneself. So here it's interesting because it's more of an individual um, step that people are taking in a country that is more around the group than the
Yeah.
individual.
Mm.
And so it's super interesting because I don't think people would really question the idea of hierarchy. I don't see that happen. I have never actually really seen that happening
Mm.
here. Like, why should we respect the boss so much? I'm never having those kinds of conversations nowadays. Who knows? Maybe in 2 years, but right now
Mm.
it's more like, is it me
Mm.
who's wrong? What's
Mm.
wrong with me? What
Mm.
can I do differently? Can I do this? Am
Mm.
I allowed to? And so these questions are more centered around the I than the culture of the country or the culture of the company. And so often what I try and explain to people who feel completely lost, it's often that there is a disconnect between the culture of their company, which is probably very clear and very well
Mm.
defined, and who they are. And they don't have a notion of who they are, what they stand for, what they want, what is important to them. And so they are confronted to this and they feel that they have to be like this, but then they feel awkward and it doesn't feel right, but they don't know why. And so I think they have this work to do around who am I, what do I want, what's important for me, what can I accept, what do I not accept, so that they can confront this and be like, this doesn't work. I need to change this to something that really works then, and find the company where I can really explore my values, I can really explore my career, I can really explore all the knowledge that I want and that I want to go into. And so I think that's the work that's interesting to see, that people, employees here are getting into more and more self-development, basically.
Yeah, I hear you. So like a very inward journey, and then people kind of make their decisions based on new information that they got, or just some sort of kind of introspection they did, and then making decisions for themselves. But then you kind of will be there to guide them through that process.
Yeah.
And then from the company side, do they appreciate? Well, I guess they do, the work that you do in terms of guiding them, because there's also that risk of like when people go onto that inward journey, that things are going to change.
Sure.
So, but maybe they see, look, we have to, because we don't want to have unhappy people. So let's take on. So is that the kind of company perspective?
On the company it depends. So that's so interesting. So most companies we work with at the moment are foreign companies that are also based in China, in Shanghai, usually most of the time. We do work with few local companies as well, but the majority is foreign brands, foreign companies in China. What I do see is often these companies are bringing a certain kind of culture here, and attracting also employees that are interested into joining this kind of culture. So it's interesting to see already who you attract depending on what brand you are and what you stand for. When employers are talking about people development, of course they are very clear about the idea that if they do not develop their people, they have no way to develop the company. So they can spend as much time as they want on innovation, sales, customer service, quality. At the end, it's your people. If your people are really at the level where you expect them to be, then you can actually lay back and let them do their job very, very well. But if your people are not there, then you need to bring them back up. Otherwise, you're always going to be in a rat race trying to get things done the way you want them to be done, but if your people cannot do it, it's just not going to work. So this takes time, and it takes investment as well, of time, of course money, efforts, and being consistent with these efforts. And I do see that some companies are really truly dedicated to this, and you do see that there is this um, growth that you can see, because one thing that I really appreciate here is the speed. You have a speed in China that I have seen nowhere else, not even in New York. Like honestly, Shanghai is crazy. China in general is just crazy. So to give you an example, I could be going out and going to my favorite restaurant tonight, and tomorrow suddenly it's closed, and in 1 week, literally 1 week, there is another restaurant there, and things just change. So you get used to change in China, like you have no choice. Changes everywhere all the time. Like the VUCA world, it's right here, right now. And it's such a pace, you just don't control anything at all. And so I believe companies that are here are learning to, okay, like we need to get in the pace. We can't spend too much time overthinking things. We need to really like be at the level. Otherwise, we're going to be eaten up. Like we have no chance if we're not competitive and fast and as good as at least the others.
Mm. And do people cope well with that idea of fast change in terms of like them projecting their career growth or things like if things are continuously changing, do they fear like, oh, I better keep up because otherwise I'm gonna, or there's some sort of like, no, cool, that's innovation and we're all in this together. How do they cope with that type of change?
Mm. I think there is a certain security around employment and work in China legally. So it's true that people don't have a pressure in terms of uh, being the best, absolutely. So that's something that the companies are driving probably more. There is a pressure in terms of numbers, specifically for foreign brands coming to China. Often China is one of their biggest market, or it's the markets that is probably one of the only one that is profitable, or there's all those things. So there's a lot of pressure that is there, even though people have a lot of security in terms of employment. There is that pressure that is there that pushes you to always kind of do more, or kind of like work harder, or kind of like find other ways. There's this really like ability to really find new ways of doing things. If one thing doesn't work, it's fine, we'll just find another way. And that's very nimble basically here.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm seeing and that I'm appreciating a lot.
Yeah, so it seems like it works well. Like there's that competitiveness from a business point of view, and it seems like people are on board, like they want to get there, and there's that introspection that companies do see that they need to bring into kind of the culture vibe. So it does seem like it's a sustainable approach in a way
Yeah.
to, and then based on that, how do employees get rewarded? Like, okay, you've done a great work, you kept up, you innovated. What's the rewards recognition looking like in companies in China?
Super interesting, because we just had a training this morning around feedback, and that is something that is so not in the culture, so not in companies culture. We do not give enough feedback. And so this morning was an extremely awkward but very fruitful morning around, yeah, like how do I even have a framework of how to deliver feedback to someone? I don't know. And so we've reviewed that together. And in the beginning we could see, so we were a few trainers for a team of leaders, so people who are in the top management, and they're all super good. They're excellent. But it's true that in terms of like management, giving feedback is one of the basic skills that we expect from a manager. So when you talk about rewards, of course the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, bonuses and things like that. For me, it's like, yeah, sure, but that's not something that's really going to motivate someone to stay with you, because someone else can pay them better. Specifically in China, someone can really pay them better. So how do you keep your employees long term, and create that trust and that relationship that makes them stay longer? People are really keen in China in staying longer, but somehow in certain companies people are leaving after 6 months. There is a turnover that can be really, really high. I was speaking with a C-level yesterday who was telling me I have a turnover of 50%. And this is like it's impossible to do business when your turnover is 50%. You cannot have any strategy, nothing. You need to fix this because
Yeah.
you cannot plan ahead. You're always hiring and training, onboarding, and then the person leaves again. You need to fix this first. This is like a priority. So bonuses won't make it. If your culture is toxic, if
Mm,
your culture makes people leave, money is not gonna it's not gonna
mm,
change anything. So having feedback is already the first step to creating a culture around trust and transparency. I'm
mm.
not giving you a feedback where I'm gonna lie, because just doesn't work. So giving feedback is really tell me.
Oh, so that's the point that, like, do managers shy away from giving feedback, or are they just too polite and they just don't give constructive feedback? When
Mm.
someone is underperforming or cultural misalignment, they don't address it. I want to understand that kind of what's going on with the feedback from the manager point of view.
Yeah, I think it's different things. One is because it's not common. It's not something that is being taught. So it's not something that is natural, where you would go to someone and give them feedback. Second, there is a question also of culture. In China, there is this culture of the face where you want to help the person in front of you keep the face. So if you give feedback, it's kind of like you're destroying them. So how do you go around this cultural point around the face, thinking that basically you're helping the other by giving them feedback? You're giving them a gift, not just destroying them. That's not the point. So I think it's this question of like shifting perceptions around feedback from I don't know how to do it to okay, I know how to do it, and I'm not comfortable doing this because this goes against my culture, to okay, I feel comfortable, and this is something that is accepted in my company. This is something that everybody does. Let's do it.
So interesting. We've been doing this series with like different regions. So, we did Latin America last week, which has completely the opposite dynamic where people offer and volunteer feedback without
Right.
necessarily having been asked, right? What a different scenario. In South Africa, we have a little bit more of a, like it's accepted, but you do need to push managers to be like, let's have that conversation. And as you
Right.
say, we want to frame it in a way where you're honoring the person. You're actually saying, I can see where you can
Right.
get if I can give you this feedback and we can, work towards that vision, as opposed to thinking like, oh, now things are going to become weird because I need to give you some constructive feedback. So
Yeah.
it's possible to that work, but I guess in China it's almost even a little bit more kind of risk averse when it comes to trying that kind of feedback. And I mean, I know that the hierarchy respect is there, but I guess that when it comes to like it's managers giving feedback, so it's like, it's the senior kind of pouring knowledge on the, more junior employee, but that's still something the manager seems to shy away from. And I just wonder, what do they do when there's underperformance, or where there's something like conduct related that they're not addressing? Do they just kind of leave it and see, like, hope for the best? Do they overcompensate and do the work for them and kind of like cover them up with whoever they report to? How, when you see that kind of inconsistency with feedback, how do they solve it?
Okay, Rose, I need you to repeat that because it just cut. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. And so when you see that there's that break in feedback, right, that is not happening,
Yeah.
how does the manager overcompensate for that? Do they do the work for them so that they can report proper work, to their, or do they just leave it and being like, okay, we're just gonna not look at that? What do they do?
Um, they probably feel a mix of different things, and you see coping mechanisms from different sorts. You would see people who work extra hard and do the work. That is extremely current. You do see people that close their eyes. You see, basically, yeah. If you don't give feedback, you're not working in a system that is really addressing performance. And so you still have this pressure around performance. So you need to make it happen in a way or another through maybe your best employee who will work twice as hard, through the entire team trying to cope for what is not happening. So it or simply just like letting it go and be like, it's okay, like whatever. So you can find lots of different coping mechanisms depending on the company, the culture of the company, and the targets of the company.
I hear you. It's maybe that concept of like teamwork, where the team has to somehow overcompensate for that kind of fall that's
Yeah.
happening. And you also see a lot in the Korean soap operas where there's dinners at night and there's alcohol involved in these dinners, and
Oh
people
yeah.
loosen up because now like they don't have that filter, and that's where more real conversations happen, and maybe that's where people kind of like decompress from, is that actually happening?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Most of the bonding. So the way we have probably in the West, that's funny because a couple of years I used to work as an engagement director for EF, and I very quickly realized that, how in the US you would have maybe an event and an after hour, an after, how do you call it, after party? No, wait, I'm not sure. After work. God.
Yeah.
So you have an after work, and you just literally have to throw some beer, some maybe a bottle of wine, and a couple of glasses, some stuff to eat, and a bit of music, and that's it. Basically, you have your after work. That's it.
Mm.
Here, it doesn't work like that at all. So uh, people really need a reason to bond. So
Mm.
we had to play games. We had to have some kind of a lottery, and to have something that gets people engaged, because a beer, a glass of wine, and someone to make discussion with is just super awkward here, not very natural. So it's true that when you have a dinner, then there is like all these things that are happening around dinner, and you have lots of baijiu, so it's the liquor here, that people really like drink with one another to give people face, exchanges like this. It's really where you show the respect, and maybe where once you get to a certain level of ebriety, I think we can say in English, then you can actually show that the other person can trust you. If you don't get drunk, you are not to be trusted. So that sounds really weird, probably from a Western point of view. If you're drunk, it's really that you're not professional. Whereas here, if you're not drunk with your team, you are not to be trusted. And so it's
Mm.
very, very different. It's very different perspectives.
Yes, no, exactly. But you can understand that some sort of mechanism to loosen up and to have a context where that's probably
Right.
where open up for conversation and to maybe hash out, things. Yeah, very interesting. So, in terms when it comes to talent retention in particular,
Mm.
what are some of the strategies, for example, with this client that you have 50% of turnover on the particular role? Where when you come in with a client, what are the type of initiatives that you have put in place to kind of address what's going on in the company and to really dissect the reason why the turnover is that high, and what do you put in place in order to make it better?
Hmm. I think there are lots of different variables. The first thing that we do usually when we enter a company is we come with very open ears, because it can be anything. It can be simply the fact that managers are not well enough developed. You know how we say you don't leave a company, you leave a manager. That's very, very true in China. I've heard stories of entire teams. Once the manager leaves the company and goes to another company, the entire team goes with them.
Mm.
So that's crazy. And I've never seen that in the West, but here there's this loyalty to the manager. So people would leave a manager more than a company because they're either attached or completely detached from their manager. So they don't mind
Mm.
leaving. Whereas if the manager is very strong and their team very strong, anything can happen in the company. Basically, the team will stay. They will not move. They're very like rock solid. So the manager is really an important point that we like to focus on to strengthen the management so that they can strengthen the team.
Mm.
In this particular discussion yesterday, I believe it's a lot of from the discussion, it's a lot around instability. There has been a lot of change, and so probably the team feels a lot of insecurity, which is not great. And people want to feel secure. They want to feel that they can have a vision of what's going to happen 6 months down the line, 1 year down the line. They want to have that perspective. So maybe there is some work to do around stabilizing and giving people perspective of, stay with us, this is where we're going, this is what we're heading towards, and you're going to be part of that change with us. So don't leave us quite yet. You're leaving at the worst moment. It's going to be bright from now on, basically. So it can be lots of different things. Sometimes people leave simply because they get a better offer financially. Salaries in China were quite low until a couple of years ago. They've become higher and higher, almost not competitive anymore for certain things here. And so it's interesting to see that these competition to get the best talent around money is still happening. But people leave for money means they know that they're not going to be treated much better. And I believe these talents, once they find a place where they're treated properly and very well, they're going to look twice before changing. Because if you get a manager that you profoundly dislike, even if you get a 20% raise, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And more people are getting to that conclusion of, I don't think I want to change. I'm really good here, and I grow, and the people surrounding me are inspiring me. I like my team. I like my manager. I like what I do, the content of my work. I like how I'm being treated. And yeah, my salary is good. So why am I going to change? There is no reason.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of good news for HR, meaning that there's good work to be done there to keep people retained. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear it's cutting, but I think I can hear you.
Okay. And then based on that feedback that you were giving us now, like the company showing the vision,
No,
right?
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me? Hello? Now? Can you hear me
Hello?
now?
Yes, now it's better. Yeah.
Okay. So do companies do work in terms of, do they disclose their financials to employees like on an annual basis, or, in order to give that vision of where the company is going, the growth that is expected, are they happy to disclose revenue, profit? Do they share profit with employees? How's that kind of conversation? Is it transparent, or kind of nobody talks about that?
It's rare. I haven't seen this much. I've seen this, but not much. This is not something that is often shared. No. Maybe someone who knows differently and listening to this could contradict me, and I would be happy to hear about other examples. But what I've seen so far is not a lot of transparency around profitability, for instance. When we work around vision and mission, it's more around concepts, inspiring concepts that guides the team towards a certain goal, and we try to stay because money is motivating, but just up to a certain point. So we try and move towards something that is a bit more inspiring than just a certain target in terms of money.
I hear you.
Do you see that in South Africa or maybe Dubai, that people are very open to revenue?
We love to bring that conversation to the table, because as much as we can link what the person understands from the business, right, to what the CEO is experiencing in terms of the pressures the business has to grow, are we pivoting, are we on growth stage, and then I always say, you obviously don't have to share your numbers, but if we don't share the numbers, can we share percentages? So people understand, okay, this is how, from the money that makes 70% is for salaries. Like, employees usually don't know salaries is the biggest expense the company has. And so that means that, it's coming to them, right? It's being shared. So those understandings kind of really lands the mindset of that the CEO has, right? Because there's usually this disconnect in terms of like, what's happening with me, my salary, my trajectory, how the business is doing. We love to bridge that gap and try equip people with business concepts during our performance management reviews or things like that. And I find it so interesting, because that's not something that's being used as much, like management as much, but it's such a beautiful tool, because the moment you can align the company to the journey of the employee, you have them. They're buying into what they're doing wholeheartedly, to say it in a way. So
What do you see is the first reaction when people discover these numbers?
yeah, so there's companies, for example, where they will be shared, in group setting.
Right.
And sometimes, me from HR, when I'm also hearing this information, I always say, okay, we're talking about millions, right? Companies that are, and now how do I now in my one-on-one sessions bring it down to how they will see changes, career growth, kind of whatever, bonuses, or how that's going to impact them? Because I don't like it to be like, cool, you're sharing the number, the really big number, but it's kind of like very intuitively the person is going to make that connection, how that affects me and my family, and what I'm, all the value that I'm adding to this business. So yes, there's a lot of companies sharing like those numbers publicly. It's almost like if you were listed, those numbers are out there, what you make, right? But for me, it's more around the one-on-one, where the manager can land it to the person how the company's doing, and maybe it's not the number, but it's this thing around we are growing, or no, we have stagnated, or we are pivoting, or like that type of information that then the employee can digest on that one-on-one, because the employee also can ask questions. In group settings, the employee will never ask a question.
That's
I even see when the bigger numbers are being shared, if let's say 2 days after I have a one-on-one with the employee and I ask them, remember was the number shared, how much the company is making, they won't recall. And that's so interesting, because it's like it's such an important thing to remember, but they won't recall. And I guess it's because it could become a little bit abstract in that kind of team setting and what it means. Well, if you have the one-on-one, it's really about, okay, we're investing in you, we're equipping you with all the business knowledge that we have, and how that links you and your career. So I find the one-on-one to be the most successful tool. So I always say, for performance management, when I sit with an executive team, what can we share? And we do it quarterly. So every quarter there's updates. What can we share with staff? Because that's going to be my message in my sessions. Like we're going to put that forward, and to be able to align the employees. And that does wonders, because then you see that people stay aligned. They don't drift away from, the company now maybe went through a change. We don't really know what's going on. And as you know, we are quite fond of our weekly kind of feedback loops
with Pulse, right?
And that also really shows you that alignment in terms of where people's minds are at. Also because it starts with the engagement, starts with the employee. So we first get to hear from, it's not swayed by the manager asking, a question like how, this OKR, how you did. It's about, tell me about your highlights. So that really helps us gauge where's that employee, is the employee aligned, misaligned, for what reason. So that has been the way for us to kind of keep a pulse on our companies in South Africa.
Yeah, I like that. It's different. It's definitely different. We do have a sense of how the company is going. For sure, that's something that is communicated, and also on one-on-ones. But it's true that when you start giving particular numbers, very clear numbers, then the thing becomes a lot more tangible for people to understand. That's a good. That's a good point.
Exactly, and we are in a world where at least here we see it, where it's almost like employment. Like it got debunked as a concept of security, and you want people to think as independent kind of contractors, or like more with remote work or hybrid concepts. Is you give employees the kind of the independence for them to choose how to contribute to a company. And that comes if you couple that with the business knowledge of what the business is doing. Then you have a great partnership in terms of like, cool, the company's heading here, this is how I add my value, as opposed to your standard permanent employment, which is like, are you adding value, to what level? You kind of always get the same salary, and it's a little bit of a different to quantify as much as the other approach. Now, to close, Marion, I'd love to hear from you in terms of the firing side. Let's say things did not go well with an employee, there is alignment. is it easy in China to terminate a person? Is it a kind of quite legal heavy involvement? Because also, well, I mean, you know that the French law, which is the one that we all kind of like in South Africa, we have quite a strong law to work with. The French is even stronger. Now in China, how's that aspect? Do people be like have very stringent legal proceedings, or how does that go?
It's true that the law in France is quite strong, but I would say the law in China is even stronger.
Wow.
It's next level, yeah. It's extremely hard to. It's big discussions around managers and leaders. Is when you hire somebody, you pay a lot of attention because that person will probably be employed by you forever until they leave, basically. So one of the main reasons why people are not employed anymore in a company is most of the time, I believe, I would have to double check numbers, but it's not because they're being fired, it's because they leave, because it is extremely costly for a company to terminate an employee. So the law is very much in favor of the employee here, not the employer, even though the employer has some rights for sure, but there are lots of things in favor of the employee. Now, there's a couple of ways to deal around this, and of course, there's lots of things that lawyers can help with. It often starts with the beginning, the contract that you start with as an employer or employee, and then it goes to certain extents where if you have someone who's in the top management and has been employed by the company for 10x years, it's going to cost you so much money to terminate that employee. It's just not reasonable for the company to do that. If there is no agreement that can be found in that person leaving the company, we have been asked already to find a way. And in China, you always find a way. And so one way could be that we find the perfect position for that person. We feel that there is a perfect position for that person, and we simply go and headhunt that person from outside without them knowing that we come from their company to place them and to place them somewhere else. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I just understood it. Wow. So
Yeah.
that's the work that needs to happen, like kind of act as the recruiter on behalf of the employee without knowing that you're trying to place them somewhere else.
Yeah. So we do that. I think we do that quite well, because the idea is not to leave the employee with nothing. The idea is really to go and start getting the employee to think outside of the box, with the small box of their company and their current employment, and really start to inspire them about what they're missing out if they're staying in this company, basically. And so it is kind of a work that is done, but it cannot be done from inside the company. It has to be done from outside. That's where we can intervene.
Yes.
So yeah, it's tough discussions sometimes. It's tough discussions.
And then when that employee kind of, do they get an understanding like, okay, my company doesn't want me anymore and they're trying to help me get another job? Does this employee feel disgruntled about this? Or is like, did the person get the point, I kind of at some point need to resign now because things went sour? Or what's that experience for the employee?
It depends. So it really depends on the case. Every time it's different. You really have different personalities, different stories and backgrounds. So it really depends. Sometimes it's very much about conflict and it's tough. So there are things that we do completely disconnected from the company. Like the employee doesn't know we come from the company. It's impossible. Otherwise, it would fail. And sometimes we are hired, for instance, when there is a wave of termination that is coming. Then our work as coaches, for instance, can help as part of the benefits for the employees who are terminated to actually go and find the next steps in their career, followed by a coach, a career coach. Then that is something where the company is very much frontal, basically offering this to their employees so that the transition is smoother for them.
I hear you. kind of
Yeah.
less personal, because it's like, okay, now we call it retrenchment in South Africa. It's like the company's going through something, financial constraints,
Yeah.
restructuring, and then
Yeah.
it's less personal. It's like, sorry guys, we need to cut you off, but we're going to give you this. And the packages that employees get out are, you mentioned, if you're senior, so it's kind of time seniority related, that you'll get quite a good package out if you are terminated because of those things.
It depends on the number of years that you've been employed at that company, your contract that you're on, basically. And usually, if you've been employed for more than 10 years in a company, you kind of have, not exactly, but you kind of have an employment life in this company. So then the next step is, if you don't leave, the company can't really fire you unless they're really going to pay extremely high amounts of money. Yeah.
And the retirement age?
65, I think, in China. I'll have to double check that. I think it's
Okay,
65.
so same as here. But then let's say you started working at 20, you're 30, now you're for life until you're 65, right?
Pretty much. But there is this mentality, like if you work in the government, basically a lot of the mentality here says that, yeah, the best job is a government job, because you cannot be fired. If you work for the government, you cannot be fired. So you have employment for life. And so that idea that you have work for life is not something that is repulsive. As much for me, it would be repulsive, but for people here, it's very accepted, very much coveted. So yeah, great, like awesome. The power is in your hand. Then you can decide to stay or to leave. Then it's not in the hand of your employer.
Yeah. And what I found is with that style is that the more kind of risk averse people, the people that don't want the change and are kind of will stay, and then the people that are more competitive and want will leave. So then that could create this sort of like, your talented people are the ones that are kind of out there in the market, actually doing the high turnover, which I guess it is something to think about. But it does seem like, as a country, there's this concept of secure employment, which I guess also brings a culture, right? That that things are more settled and there's not maybe so much anxiety around it. So I guess maybe people go like, cool, I'm actually going to perform because I have this for life. Let's do well, So maybe you have that going on as well.
Yeah, it depends on the person. Some people could say, oh, I have this position for life, now I'm just not going to do anything. And some people might think, oh, all the security part of my work, all my needs are going to be covered, so now I can really focus on my work, and how can I really do this to the best extent, basically. So it's really a question of mindset.
Yeah, I hear you. Amazing. I really, really enjoy this chat, Marion. I feel like there's so much to learn, from the different regions and how HR is done differently in each region. It does sound like HR can do really, really good work in the East, from what we were speaking about from a retention point of view, and these amazing workarounds to think of, how to either let go of people, or it sounds like that it's very rewarding work. And that it's also quite that there's, that you mentioned, this introspection thing of career development and kind of really thinking what's best for you and planning career paths. It sounds like it is a really rewarding job.
Yeah, and I think what I like about our discussion is that we have so much different perspective, and we're bringing each other so much knowledge around HR and best practices, what works, what doesn't work. I really enjoy every time discussing with you, Rose, and learning more each time about whether HR or Middle East.
Yes, really good. And something that we discussed that we have in common is this thing that we come from a different culture and we do HR in a different culture to ours. So I guess there's always this kind of retrospection, or just really thinking about how you go about HR in that region. And it's just so interesting to see how you have that kind of value add in the region that you perform, that you work, because you took the time to, what do you bring different to the work that is. And it does seem like in China, they're super receptive to, let's bring a little bit of a mindset of somewhere else to plug in, and how that will actually make us better.
Yeah. It's a very complex culture. Like I always say, yeah, I know China, but the more I know about it, the less I know it. There's so much to discover about China. It's just not something that can be really explained in a couple of minutes. And even what I'm saying today can be proved wrong tomorrow. So it's really a very complex culture to deal with, and it's what I'm passionate about, basically. So yeah, I hope I could share more about this country, this culture that I'm living and working in, and the practices we have around people management, employee retention, and talent retention as well during this time with you. So thank you so much, Rose, for having me, sharing these little stories.
Such a pleasure, Marion. We're going to stay in touch. Have a good
Great.
day.
You too. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.